So, you're homeless now, huh? My ex-husband smirked as we walked out of the courtroom. I laughed. His smile vanished. What's so funny? I leaned closer and whispered. You forgot one thing. The color drained from his face for a split second, then he scoffed and shook his head. No, Claire, I think you're the one who forgot. Maybe he believed that. Maybe he needed to. Because the truth was that he had just spent 18 months fighting to take the one thing that was about to destroy him. And I had spent those same 18 months making sure he got exactly what he wanted. The day my marriage officially ended was surprisingly beautiful. Phoenix was enjoying one of those rare Arizona mornings when the heat hadn't yet become oppressive. The sky was bright blue, the palm trees swayed gently in the breeze, and people walked in and out of the courthouse carrying coffee cups, as if their lives weren't changing forever. I stood on the courthouse steps holding a folder that contained everything I legally owned. The folder wasn't very thick. My ex-husband Ryan made sure of that. If you'd asked anyone who knew us 20 years earlier whether we'd end up divorced, they would have laughed. Ryan and I had built our lives together from absolutely nothing. We met in our early 20s when we were both working at a shipping company outside Phoenix. He worked in sales, I worked in operations. He was charming, outgoing, and impossible to ignore. I was quieter, more analytical, and usually happiest sitting behind a desk solving problems. We balanced each other perfectly. At least that's what I believed back then. After we got married, we decided to start our own logistics company. We emptied our savings accounts, maxed out credit cards, and converted our garage into a makeshift office. Those first years were brutal. I still remember sitting at our kitchen table at 2 a.m. processing invoices, while Ryan slept on the couch after spending 12 hours driving across Arizona trying to land new clients. We struggled. We worried. We failed. Then we got up and did it all again the next day. Eventually, things started working. A small manufacturing company gave us a contract. Then another one. Then another. Within 10 years, we had 40 employees, a real office, and annual revenue that would have seemed impossible when we first started. People often complimented Ryan. They saw the confident businessman, the charismatic owner, the guy who could walk into a room and have everyone laughing within 5 minutes. What they didn't see were the spreadsheets, the payroll crises, the endless negotiations with vendors, the nights spent balancing budgets and managing cash flow. That was my job. And honestly, I never minded. For most of our marriage, Ryan appreciated what I brought to the business. At least I thought he did. Looking back now, I can pinpoint the exact moment things started changing. Success, not failure. Success. When we were struggling, we were a team. When money arrived, Ryan started believing he was the reason for it. The first warning sign came when he bought a luxury SUV without discussing it with me. The second came when he started spending more time attending networking events than actually working. The third came when he stopped introducing me as his business partner. Instead, I became my wife. Just my wife. The woman who happened to be standing beside him. One evening about 4 years before our divorce, we attended a Chamber of Commerce dinner. A man congratulated Ryan on the company's growth. Ryan smiled proudly. Yeah, he said, I've worked my tail off to get here. It was such a small thing. Most people wouldn't have noticed. I noticed. On the drive home, I stared out the passenger window and listened to him talk about future expansion plans. He never realized how quiet I'd become. The distance between us didn't happen overnight. It happened one conversation at a time, one decision at a time, one act of arrogance at a time. Then came the affair, ironically discovering it wasn't dramatic. There was no lipstick on a collar, no mysterious text message, no private investigator. I found out because Ryan became careless. People who think they're smarter than everyone else usually do. Her name was Brittany. She was 29 years old. She worked in marketing. And according to Ryan, she understood his vision. I remember sitting in my office staring at that text message for almost 10 minutes. Not crying, not screaming. Just staring. 20 years? Gone. Reduced to a handful of words on a phone screen. When I confronted him, he didn't even deny it. That hurt more than the affair itself. The complete lack of shame. The complete certainty that he would come out on top no matter what happened. Ryan sat across from me in our kitchen and shrugged. Actually shrugged. I didn't plan for this to happen. Of course you didn't. I deserve to be happy too, Claire. I laughed. Not because anything was funny. Because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You deserve to be happy. Don't do that. Do what? Make me the villain. That sentence told me everything. In his mind, he wasn't destroying a marriage. He wasn't betraying a partner. He was pursuing happiness. People can justify almost anything when they tell themselves the right story. A month later, he moved out. 3 months later, he filed for divorce. 6 months later, he demanded the house. Not asked. Demanded. The house wasn't just a house. It was a 7-bedroom property in Scottsdale that we'd purchased during the company's most successful years. Ryan loved that house. Loved what it represented. Success. Status. Victory. The problem was that he wanted it so badly he stopped paying attention to everything else. During mediation, my attorney repeatedly asked whether I wanted to fight for it. Each time I gave the same answer. No. Ryan couldn't believe it. He expected a battle. He expected tears. He expected desperation. Instead, I simply let him have what he wanted. The more cooperative I became, the greedier he became. Like a gambler on a winning streak. He pushed harder. Asked for more. Demanded more. And every time he did, I quietly took notes. Because while Ryan focused on assets, I focused on information. And information is usually worth far more than property. The divorce dragged on for 18 exhausting months. By the end, most people believed Ryan had won. Maybe they were right. At least for the moment. As I stood outside that courthouse listening to him mock me about being homeless, I realized something strange. I didn't feel defeated. I didn't feel angry. I didn't even feel sad. I felt relieved. Because for the first time in years, I no longer had to protect a man from the consequences of his own decisions. And that was when things were finally about to get interesting. For most of our marriage, Ryan believed risk was something that happened to other people. That wasn't because he was stupid. Ryan was intelligent, charismatic, and incredibly persuasive. The problem was that success had convinced him he was untouchable. And untouchable people make dangerous decisions. About 3 years before our divorce, our logistics company hit what looked like a golden period. Revenue was climbing faster than ever. Several large manufacturing clients had signed long-term contracts, and local business magazines were suddenly interested in interviewing Ryan. He loved every second of it. I should have been happier than I was. Instead, I felt nervous. Not because the company was failing, because it was growing too fast. One afternoon, I walked into Ryan's office carrying a stack of financial reports. He barely glanced up from his phone. "You need to see these. Can it wait?" "No." He sighed dramatically and put the phone down. I spread the reports across his desk. "Our expenses are increasing faster than our reserves." Ryan leaned back. So if one major client leaves, we'll have a problem." He laughed. "Nobody's leaving. That's not how risk management works. Claire, you worry too much." That became one of his favorite phrases. You worry too much. I heard it when I questioned expensive equipment purchases. I heard it when I objected to unnecessary hiring. I heard it when he started talking about buying a much larger house. Especially the house. That conversation lasted almost 3 months. Ryan became obsessed with a luxury property in Scottsdale. 7 bedrooms. A resort-style pool. A guest house. Mountain views. The kind of place people buy when they want the world to know they've made it. I hated it immediately. Not because it wasn't beautiful. Because it was excessive. We didn't have children living at home. We didn't need 7 bedrooms. We didn't need a guest house. We didn't need most of what came with that property. Ryan disagreed. We've earned this. That's not the point. Then what is? The point is that cash gives us flexibility. He rolled his eyes. You always think like an accountant. No, I think like someone who's responsible for payroll. That argument continued for weeks. Eventually, Ryan got what he wanted. He usually did. We bought the house. The monthly costs were staggering. Property taxes, maintenance, insurance, landscaping, utilities. Every month I watched money leave our accounts and wondered whether we'd made a mistake. Then something happened that changed everything. A national retailer approached us with an opportunity. It was the largest contract our company had ever been offered. Landing it would nearly double our revenue. Ryan was ecstatic. I was cautious. The opportunity was real, but so was the risk. To handle the volume, we'd need additional equipment, warehouse expansion, and significant operating capital. That meant borrowing money. A lot of money. I still remember the meeting at the bank. The lender sat across from us explaining the terms while Ryan practically vibrated with excitement. The numbers were enormous. Millions of dollars. Pages of legal documents, financial projections, risk disclosures. The kind of meeting where every word matters. The lender explained everything carefully, including the collateral requirements. The company alone wasn't enough. The bank wanted additional security, including our house. I watched Ryan sign the paperwork, not reluctantly, not cautiously, confidently, like a man signing an autograph. Afterward, we walked to the parking garage. Are you comfortable with this? I asked. Absolutely. It's a lot of exposure. It's a lot of opportunity. Those aren't the same thing. Ryan smiled. They are if you know what you're doing. The loan went through. For a while, it looked brilliant. Revenue exploded. The company expanded. The local business community praised Ryan's leadership. Articles featured his picture. Awards appeared on his office wall. The bigger the company became, the bigger Ryan's ego became. Meanwhile, I continued monitoring cash flow, client retention, debt obligations, and every other boring thing nobody wanted to discuss, including one client. One very important client. The national retailer represented nearly 30% of our revenue. 30%. That number kept me awake at night. Not because anything was wrong, because concentration risk is dangerous. If they ever left, the consequences would be severe. I raised the issue repeatedly. Ryan brushed it aside repeatedly. They love us. That's not a strategy. It's reality. No, I said. It's an assumption. Years passed. Then subtle changes began appearing. Nothing dramatic. A delayed renewal discussion. A new executive on their side. Questions about pricing. Conversations that felt slightly different. I noticed. Ryan didn't. Or maybe he noticed and refused to acknowledge it. By then, his attention was focused elsewhere, including Brittany. The affair didn't just destroy our marriage. It distracted him from the business. Meetings were missed. Details were ignored. Relationships weakened. The cracks started forming long before anyone could see them. During the divorce process, I spent countless hours reviewing financial records. That was when I realized something important. The warning signs regarding our largest client were becoming impossible to ignore. Nothing official had happened yet, but I could feel it coming, the same way experienced sailors recognize a storm before the clouds arrive. One afternoon, my attorney looked at me across a conference table. Claire, are you absolutely sure about the house? Yes. If you fight for it, you have a reasonable chance. I shook my head. No. She studied me carefully. You know something. I smiled. I know Ryan. That was enough. Because Ryan wasn't fighting for shelter. He wasn't fighting for financial security. He wasn't even fighting for fairness. He was fighting for the trophy, the symbol, the proof that he had won. And people chasing trophies often stop reading the fine print. Months later, during the final stages of the divorce, the judge reviewed the settlement. Everything was legal. Everything was transparent. Everything was documented. Ryan received exactly what he demanded. The house, the prestige, the image, the victory. As we left the courtroom, he couldn't resist rubbing it in. That's when he asked whether I enjoyed being homeless. That's when I laughed. Because what Ryan never understood was that houses don't create wealth. They consume it. And the larger the house, the larger the appetite. Especially when it's tied to obligations he had spent years pretending didn't exist. That night, while Ryan celebrated his victory with Brittany, I sat alone in a modest apartment I had rented months earlier. The apartment was small, quiet, nothing fancy. A simple place with beige walls, second-hand furniture, and a tiny balcony overlooking a parking lot. For the first time in years, I slept peacefully. Because I knew something Ryan didn't. The clock had already started ticking. And somewhere in a corporate boardroom hundreds of miles away, executives were making a decision that would change everything. The first 2 weeks after the divorce were exactly what Ryan had imagined. And exactly what I expected. If you looked at his social media accounts, you'd think he was living the dream. There were photos of poolside dinners, expensive wine, and smiling selfies taken from the balcony of the Scottsdale house. Brittany appeared in nearly every picture, usually leaning against him, while he grinned at the camera like a man who had finally escaped some terrible burden. The comments poured in. Congratulations. You deserve happiness. What an amazing new chapter. Ryan happily accepted every compliment. He always enjoyed an audience. I saw the pictures because mutual friends kept sending them to me. Not maliciously. Most of them were simply uncomfortable and didn't know how to navigate the situation. A few even apologized. I'm sorry, Claire. For what? For him acting like this. I usually shrugged. People show who they are eventually. The truth was that the photos didn't bother me. Not anymore. 6 months earlier they would have. 3 months earlier maybe. But by then I was emotionally exhausted. When you've spent years cleaning up someone else's messes, eventually you stop feeling angry and start feeling tired. And once the exhaustion passes, something interesting happens. You gain clarity. I spent my evenings settling into my new apartment. There wasn't much to unpack. The divorce had stripped my life down to essentials: a couch, a bed, a dining table, a few boxes of books, some photographs. At first glance, it probably looked sad. Oddly enough, it wasn't. For the first time in years, there was no tension waiting for me at home. No arguments, no manipulation, no pretending, just peace. One Friday evening, I sat on my tiny balcony drinking iced tea while watching cars move through the parking lot below. My phone rang. It was Linda, our former director of operations, one of the few senior employees who had remained close to me after the divorce. "You busy?" "No." She hesitated. Then she said something that immediately caught my attention. "I heard from someone at Horizon." I sat up. Horizon Retail Group, our largest client. The client I'd been worried about for years. "What did you hear?" "They've been meeting with another logistics provider." I closed my eyes. There it was. The storm. Finally visible. "How serious?" "I don't know. But serious enough that people are talking." After we hung up, I sat quietly for several minutes. I wasn't happy. I wasn't celebrating. But I wasn't surprised either. When you've spent years studying patterns, eventually you learn to recognize them. 3 days later, another call came. This time from a former account manager. Then another. Then another. Different people. Different pieces of information. All pointing toward the same conclusion. Something major was happening. Meanwhile, Ryan remained blissfully unaware. Or maybe he refused to see it. His social media updates certainly hadn't changed. The house. The pool. The vacations. The expensive dinners. The performance continued. Then 3 weeks after the divorce became final, my phone rang at 7:12 in the morning. The caller ID made me freeze. Ryan. For a moment I considered letting it go to voicemail. Instead I answered. "Hello." Silence. Then, "Claire." His voice sounded different. Not defeated. Not yet. But strained. "What is it, Ryan?" Another pause. "We lost Horizon." I looked out the window. The Arizona sun was rising over the apartment complex. People were heading to work. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. Life continued. "We lost them yesterday." I said nothing. "They signed with another company." Still nothing. "Did you hear me?" "Yes." Another silence. Then came the question. The question I had been expecting for months. "Did you know—" I leaned back in my chair. "Know what? That this might happen." There it was. The beginning. I closed my eyes. Yes. The silence that followed lasted nearly 10 seconds. When Ryan finally spoke again, his voice sounded smaller. "You knew." "I suspected, and you didn't tell me." That actually made me laugh. Not cruelly, just in disbelief. "I told you for years." "Not this." "Exactly this." I remembered every conversation, every warning, every spreadsheet, every projection, every meeting where I explained concentration risk, every moment he dismissed me. The information had always been there. Ryan simply didn't want to hear it. By the following week, the impact became obvious. Horizon hadn't represented all our revenue, but they represented enough. Without that contract, cash flow immediately tightened. Loan obligations suddenly looked much larger. Operating expenses became more dangerous. And the house became a different kind of problem. A beautiful problem. An expensive problem. A problem with a mortgage, taxes, insurance, maintenance costs, and legal obligations attached to it. For years, those costs had been supported by business income. Now the foundation underneath that income was cracking. The first time Ryan truly panicked was when the bank requested updated financial documentation. He called twice that day. I didn't answer. He left 3 voicemails. The first sounded irritated. The second sounded worried. The third sounded scared. By then, I already knew where this was heading. Not because I possessed secret information. Not because I had manipulated anything. Because math doesn't care about confidence. Numbers don't care about ego. Reality eventually catches everyone. About a month after the divorce, I ran into one of our former vendors at a grocery store. We chatted near the produce section. Eventually, he lowered his voice. "Rough situation with Ryan." I nodded politely. "He'll figure it out." The vendor looked doubtful. "Maybe." Then he added, "People keep asking how you walked away from that house." I smiled. "They assume it was the valuable asset. Wasn't it?" I thought about that for a moment. Then I answered honestly, "No, the house wasn't the valuable asset. The valuable asset was knowledge, experience, judgment, relationships, discipline, the things nobody could see. The things Ryan had stopped valuing years earlier. One evening about 6 weeks after the divorce, I received another call from him. This time I answered immediately. His voice sounded exhausted. Not angry, not arrogant. Exhausted. Claire. Ryan, I need to ask you something. I waited. When you said I forgot one thing, my pulse slowed. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. What did you mean? I stared out my apartment window as headlights moved through the darkness below. Then I gave him the only answer he was ready for. You'll figure it out. And before he could respond, I ended the call. Because the lesson hadn't finished teaching itself yet. Not even close. By the second month after the divorce, the victory Ryan had celebrated so loudly was beginning to look very different. The transformation wasn't dramatic at first. There was no single catastrophic event. No sheriff showing up at the front door. No sudden bankruptcy filing. No overnight collapse. Real life rarely works that way. Instead, pressure accumulated slowly, relentlessly, like water finding cracks in a foundation. And for the first time in his adult life, Ryan had nobody standing beside him quietly patching those cracks before they became disasters. For more than 20 years, that had been my role. Not because I enjoyed it. Because someone had to do it. I had spent our marriage solving problems before Ryan even knew they existed. Managing cash flow. Negotiating payment terms. Preventing payroll crises. Building relationships with clients. Tracking risks. Planning contingencies. The work wasn't glamorous. Nobody handed out awards for it. But it kept everything standing. Now he was discovering what happened when the person doing all of that disappeared. One afternoon, Linda called me again. Have you heard what? They're cutting staff. I closed my laptop. How many? 10 so far. 10 employees? 10 families? 10 people suddenly wondering how they would pay mortgages and car payments. The news hit me harder than I expected. Even after everything Ryan had done, I still cared about the employees. Many had worked with us for years. I remembered company Christmas parties, birthday celebrations, retirement lunches, watching their children grow up. They weren't responsible for Ryan's decisions. Unfortunately, businesses don't care about fairness. When revenue disappears, expenses follow. That night I sat at my kitchen table staring at old company photos. There was one picture taken nearly 15 years earlier. Ryan and I stood side by side in front of our first warehouse. We looked exhausted, proud, happy, a team. For a moment I barely recognized those people. Then my phone buzzed. A text message. From Brittany. That surprised me. We had never been close. In fact, we had barely spoken during the entire divorce. The message was short. Can we talk? I stared at it for several seconds. Then I replied, about what? Her answer came almost immediately. Ryan. I considered ignoring her. Instead, curiosity won. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop the following afternoon. When I arrived, Brittany was already there. And she looked nothing like the confident woman from Ryan's social media posts. The expensive clothes were still there. The designer handbag was still there. But the certainty was gone. She looked tired, worried, embarrassed. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she sighed. I know you probably hate me. I don't. Her eyes widened. You don't? No, I meant it. Hatred requires energy. I had none left for that. Brittany looked down at her coffee. He's falling apart. I wasn't surprised. Still hearing someone else say it felt different. What's happening? She laughed bitterly. What isn't happening? Then the story started pouring out. The financial pressure. The bank meetings. The stress. The arguments. The sleepless nights. The panic. Apparently, Ryan spent hours pacing through the house every evening, reviewing numbers, making calls, searching for solutions, trying desperately to regain control. He's not the person I thought he was. I almost smiled. That realization was arriving a few years later than mine. What did you think he was? She hesitated, then answered honestly. Successful. That word hung between us. Successful. The strange thing was that Ryan actually had been successful. Very successful. The problem was that he eventually started confusing success with invincibility. And those are not the same thing. Before we left, Brittany asked one final question. Did you know this was going to happen? I considered my answer carefully. No. She looked confused. But I knew it could happen. That's an important difference. I hadn't predicted the future. I had simply respected risk. Something Ryan stopped doing years ago. 3 weeks later, Brittany moved out. I heard about it through mutual friends. Apparently, the arguments had become constant. The financial stress was overwhelming. The lifestyle she had signed up for no longer existed. And once the image disappeared, reality remained. Ryan called me that same week. I almost didn't answer. Almost. Hello? For several seconds, all I heard was breathing. Then, she left. I closed my eyes. I'm sorry. And strangely enough, I meant that too. Not because I felt sorry for the affair, but because watching someone lose everything is painful even when they helped create the situation themselves. Ryan laughed bitterly. You know what's funny? What? I thought you were the problem. I didn't respond, because there was nothing useful to say. Eventually, he continued. I really believed that. The arrogance was gone now. The defensiveness, too. For the first time in years, I was hearing the man I married instead of the character he'd been pretending to be. Over the next month, more bad news arrived. The company continued shrinking. Clients grew nervous. Credit tightened. Expenses mounted. Every decision became harder. Every mistake became more expensive. Meanwhile, my own life was slowly improving. Not dramatically, just steadily. A former client introduced me to the CEO of a regional logistics firm. We met for lunch, then another meeting, then another. Within weeks, I was consulting on operational restructuring. A few months later, I accepted a senior leadership position. The salary wasn't important. The respect was. For the first time in years, people listened when I spoke. They valued preparation, strategy, discipline. The very things Ryan had dismissed. One evening after finishing a long day at work, I returned to my apartment and found another voicemail. Ryan again. His voice sounded exhausted. Older somehow. I listened carefully. Claire, I finally understand something. I sat quietly. I kept thinking the house was the prize. He laughed softly. A broken laugh. Turns out it was just a responsibility. I replayed that message 3 times, not because it brought me satisfaction, because it showed growth. Painful growth. Expensive growth. But growth nonetheless. And that's when I realized something surprising. The trap had never been the house. The trap had never been the loan. The trap had never been the divorce. The trap was greed. Ryan built it himself. Brick by brick. Decision by decision. Year after year. All I had done was step aside and stop protecting him from it. And the lesson still wasn't finished. Because there was one question he hadn't fully answered yet. What exactly was the one thing he forgot? The answer was waiting. And soon he would finally be ready to hear it. 9 months after our divorce, I saw Ryan again. Not in a courtroom. Not at a mediation session. Not through photographs on social media. In person. The meeting wasn't planned. At least not originally. I had just finished speaking at a regional logistics conference in Phoenix. The event had been organized by one of our industry's professional associations, and several hundred people from transportation, warehousing, and supply chain companies had attended. The irony wasn't lost on me. A year earlier, I had spent most of my professional life standing behind someone else's spotlight. Now I was standing on my own stage. After the presentation ended, I stayed behind answering questions from attendees. The conversations were thoughtful, practical, and refreshingly free of ego. People wanted to discuss systems, risk management, operational efficiency, the kinds of things I had always loved. By the time I left the conference center, the afternoon sun was beginning to sink toward the horizon. I was walking toward the parking garage when I heard someone call my name. Claire. I stopped, turned, and saw Ryan. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The difference was startling. Not because he looked terrible. He didn't. He simply looked real. The expensive confidence was gone. The carefully constructed image had disappeared. What remained was a 50-year-old man who had been humbled by life. There were new lines around his eyes, more gray in his hair, a quieter presence. The strange thing was that he actually looked more like the man I married than he had in years. Hi, Ryan. Hi. An awkward silence followed. Then he nodded toward the conference center. I heard your presentation. That surprised me. You did most of it. And a faint smile appeared. It was good. Not long ago, that compliment would have come with a qualification. A criticism. A joke. An attempt to reclaim the spotlight. This time it didn't. It stood on its own. Thank you. He glanced toward the parking lot, then back at me. Do you have a minute? I considered the question, then nodded. We found a quiet bench outside the building. For a while, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, just unfamiliar. Finally, Ryan broke it. The house sold. I wasn't surprised. The financial pressure had made that outcome almost inevitable. How do you feel about it? He laughed softly. You know, that's the funny part. What? I thought losing the house would destroy me. I waited. It didn't. His eyes drifted toward the horizon. The divorce hurt. The company shrinking hurt. Losing Brittany hurt. But the house? He shook his head. It was just a house. For years he had treated it like a trophy. Now he spoke about it like furniture. Growth often sounds exactly like that. Simple. Obvious. Arriving years later than it should. A few moments passed before he spoke again. I finally figured out why you laughed outside the courthouse. I raised an eyebrow. Did you? I think so. I waited. You knew I was chasing the wrong thing. I smiled slightly. That's part of it. Ryan nodded, then looked directly at me. But I still want to hear it. Hear what? The answer. His voice became softer. The thing I forgot. For a moment I said nothing. Not because I didn't know. Because I wanted to choose the right words. 22 years of marriage. Years of sacrifice. Years of resentment. Years of lessons. It deserved an honest answer. Finally I spoke. You forgot who built everything. Ryan stared at me. I continued. You thought the house was the success. You thought the company was the success. You thought the money was the success. His expression slowly changed. Not defensive. Reflective. You forgot where those things came from. The afternoon breeze moved through the trees around us. Cars passed in the distance. Life continued. And for the first time in years, Ryan listened without interrupting. You spent years believing success was something you owned. I looked at him carefully. But success isn't a possession. It's a skill. It's judgment. It's discipline. It's character. It's the ability to solve problems when things go wrong. I paused. The house wasn't valuable because it existed. It was valuable because people worked to earn it. The company wasn't valuable because it had trucks and warehouses. It was valuable because people built relationships, solved problems, and created trust. Ryan lowered his eyes. I continued quietly. When you started chasing symbols instead of substance, everything changed. The words weren't cruel. They didn't need to be. Reality had already done the hard work. For a long moment he sat silently. Then he nodded. Slowly. I did forget. There it was. Not an excuse. Not a justification. An admission. Sometimes that's the closest thing to justice life gives us. Eventually Ryan spoke again. You know something? What? I spent months blaming everyone. I smiled faintly. That sounds exhausting. It was. He laughed. A genuine laugh this time. No kidding. Then he grew serious. But the truth is nobody did this to me. I said nothing. Because he was finally saying it himself. I kept looking for someone to blame. The bank. The market. The clients. You? He shook his head. Turns out most of my problems started with my own decisions. That sentence was worth more than any apology. More than revenge. More than humiliation.